Welcome to the pharmaphorum podcast. This is web editor Nicole Raleigh, and today I have with me Haseeb Ahmad, CEO of Purespring Therapeutics, a precision nephrology company pioneering first-in-class targeted genetic therapies designed to preserve kidney function. Welcome, Haseeb.
Hi, Nicole. Great to be with you.
Now, Purespring is focused on transforming the treatment of kidney disease, but I will leave that to Haseeb to tell you more today. First of all, I would like Haseeb to introduce himself for you, our listeners, and describe the journey that led him to today. I believe you joined Purespring nearly a year ago, Haseeb, from Novartis.
That's correct. And when I answer this question of the journey that brought me to Purespring, which is something I get asked fairly frequently as I meet people, I actually go probably further back than most people would. If you look at my origin story, if you like, I was born and brought up in Liverpool in the northwest of England, which is a fascinating place to grow up. It's a real melting pot in terms of diverse communities. I was, and remain I am, the son of immigrants, which had quite an important role in my upbringing. A lot of my childhood was just curious about the world, diversity. I went to a Jewish school for primary school, Church of England school for secondary school. I was brought up as a Muslim, and both my parents were doctors. So I decided pretty early on that I wanted to explore the world, work in a global environment, and I was always fascinated about people from different communities and trying to do something good within the world. And I really saw healthcare for my own parents being doctors as a source for good in the world. So as a result of that, I joined the global pharmaceutical industry, where I've worked for just over 25 years. So I'm aging myself now. And in the last number of years, I kind of continued in roles of increasing responsibility, large commercial leadership roles, small affiliates of about 100 people to larger affiliates like running the UK at Novartis, about 1,000 people, to more recently leading Europe, which was up to 12,000 people at Novartis. But on that journey, I guess my professional and personal passions combined. About 5 years ago, 4 or 5 years ago, I was leading Novartis's gene therapy business. I'm very passionate about gene therapy. A couple of years prior to that, I was globally responsible for commercial development and leading new product teams that were responsible for product and portfolio strategy, and was one of the sponsors saying that Novartis should get into renal disease. And then more personally, my father, who I mentioned, both my parents were doctors, my father was a nephrologist, a kidney specialist who invented one of the world's first portable kidney machines. So what led me to Purespring is a passion for gene therapy, a passion for nephrology, and a passion for this industry that's brought me back to the UK. I'm a Brit, spent most of my career in the UK. I've traveled around different countries, and that's the journey that's brought me to where I am today.
It's quite a journey and quite an origin story, as you say. Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that, Haseeb. So if we go to all those combined passions and exploring the world and doing something good within that world, let's now segue to a very specific landscape, and that is the landscape of kidney disease, more specifically chronic kidney disease, from which more than 840 million people worldwide are suffering. So I was wondering if you could tell us more about that landscape of unmet need, which I appreciate some listeners perhaps don't like that term, but for the ease of requesting the information, perhaps you could tell us more, Haseeb.
I think many believe within the nephrology community that kidney disease is the largest under-recognized health burden that we face. So to give you some context within that, kidney disease is in the top 10 causes of death globally. But in terms of healthcare spend, it's in the top 5, because many of these patients end up on dialysis, require treatment. It's a significant burden on a healthcare system. Also puts significant burden on families. It's also a disease area where if you're on dialysis, there's a disproportionately high rate of unemployment. So this can have significant socioeconomic and emotional burden that it puts onto patients and to families. And then obviously the increase in the focus on cost of healthcare systems. One of the reasons why it's so important that innovation comes through to kidney diseases, up until now, screening has not been particularly good. Therefore, it's a silent disease, diagnosed very late. Typically, when you see cloudiness, protein in your urine, sometimes blood in your urine. And until now, there haven't been many licensed treatments for many kidney conditions, so very limited ability to halt or reverse disease. Almost all patients end up in end-stage kidney failure. Kidney disease also is a massive multiplier in terms of increasing cardiovascular risk. So often patients have kidney disease and concomitant comorbid heart disease. They're at much greater likelihood of having a heart attack or a stroke. And this is the reason why in the last, I'd say 10 years, the industry has become more intensive on researching and developing medicines for kidney disease. And we've seen really in the last 4 or 5 years, treatments now coming through for a number of kidney diseases. So it's an area, I think most companies that are now focusing on cardiovascular disease, cardiometabolic disease, are now starting to also branch into the third arm, which is also renal disease.
Thank you, Haseeb. Yes, we are hearing more and more at pharmaphorum about the CRM space, as you say. Speaking of innovation, I'd like now to turn to Purespring's lead program, and that is the podocyte-targeted gene therapy PS002, which is for IgAN or IgA nephropathy. I was wondering if you could tell us more about that, but also, if you can, tell us more about the evolution of the gene therapy landscape more generally in this regard, and the potential, particularly when it comes to, as we've been discussing, nephrology.
So maybe first I'll talk a little bit about the platform, and then I'll get on to gene therapy. I think, Nicole, most people you speak to will say what they're doing is really differentiated. I would go a step further and say what we're doing is really unique. We're the only company that is focused on direct delivery of genetic therapeutics directly to the kidney. So this is kind of precision nephrology. We have a platform called the Glomthera platform that can deliver genetic payloads directly to a specialized cell in the glomerulus called the podocyte. The podocyte has a number of roles, but its two key roles are, firstly, maintaining filtration within the glomerulus, a key unit within the kidney, and secondly, maintaining overall glomerular health. So clearly, if you have dysfunction in the podocyte, then that can lead to kidney disease. One of the nice things about the podocyte when it comes to gene therapies is it's almost the perfect cell type to deliver a gene therapy to. So these are cells that are terminally differentiated. It means that they don't turn over. So if you can deliver a gene of interest to the podocyte and you can express protein, it really gives you the thesis for durable efficacy. With the approach we're taking, because it's locally administered, we're typically going to be dosing at about less than 10% of that dose, the systemic dose of a systemic gene therapy. So that makes what we're doing highly attractive because we can optimize for efficacy. You asked also about the gene therapy field. This is a field that I think has gone through the kind of peak of inflated expectations into something, at one point, the trough of disillusionment, but now we're coming out of that into what I would consider this slope of enlightenment. We've learned a lot about gene therapies. We're clearly seeing really impressive results. So those first patients who got access to gene therapies for spinal muscular atrophy, for hemophilia conditions, they're hitting milestones that we didn't even dream that patients could potentially hit with those conditions some years ago. Some of the headwinds we've seen in gene therapies have been around, is it commercially viable? How do you price these? How do you get them reimbursed in 20th century healthcare systems? Significant challenges around manufacturing and high yield and reproducible manufacturing at scale, and also about safety. But I think we've learned a lot, and that's where particularly low dose, locally administered gene therapy addresses many of those challenges, and that's the approach that we're taking. And I really think that with these approaches that we're now seeing with low dose, locally administered gene therapies, if you're targeting the right cell type, as we are with the podocyte, I think it really becomes something of a tailwind, and we've de-risked our modality in many ways.
Just wonderful. Sorry for the pause there. I was just listening to all the details. I like this expression when it comes to the general gene therapy landscape of going from the peak of expectation to the trough of disillusionment to the slope of enlightenment. So going back to Purespring's platform and this this low dose, locally administered gene therapy, working, as you say, with almost a perfect cell type to deliver it. I was wondering, where do you go from that? Where next with this type of innovation? And indeed, what next for Purespring?
We're starting, our lead candidate, PS002, is focused on IgA nephropathy. IgA nephropathy affects almost 500,000 people globally. In that particular condition, immune complexes form within the bloodstream. They get deposited within the glomerulus. When those immune complexes get deposited, it creates an inflammatory cascade. So our approach with that particular lead asset, it's a non-monogenic condition. We're using a platform to deliver a gene of interest, CFI, which produces the protein complement factor I. It's a complement inhibition approach. It basically deactivates the complement cascade. That's a really attractive proposition in IgA nephropathy, because up until now, all complement inhibitors have been systemic complement inhibitors, oral, so they work systemically and therefore deregulate complement at a systemic level, which then creates certain safety concerns. We're doing it very much locally. Beyond that, there is really the opportunity to go after monogenic conditions. Now, in monogenic conditions, if you have a missing or faulty gene and you can deliver a working copy of the gene, it can potentially halt cause of disease. So if you were to identify patients early enough, treat them early enough, it is potentially curative and can have a dramatic impact on disease. And our second and third candidates are in monogenic conditions. So our second candidate, which we've just announced recently, is in Alport syndrome, which alongside ADPKD is one of the largest genetic kidney diseases. And then we have a third asset, which is in steroid-resistant nephrotic syndrome, a debilitating condition in children, and also there's quite a large adult prevalent population. But that's where we're going next. Alport syndrome is, again, another very debilitating condition. Both of those second and third indication assets, there are no licensed therapies available. So that's where we're going now, basically treating the previously undruggable diseases with this platform.
So on that concept of treating previously undruggable conditions, on that concept of halting progression and potentially curative, it kind of preempts and nullifies my final question, Haseeb, which is, what would you hope for patient options in the renal space within the next decade?
The next decade for renal disease, and more importantly for renal patients, is going to be really exciting. One of the nice things about there being lots of companies entering the space and creating competition is it's going to bring more treatment options. More treatment options is going to increase the need for patient screening, earlier diagnosis, which means then you can optimize treatment earlier, delay disease, prevent disease, certainly hopefully delay the need for dialysis and or transplant. So I think that early detection is going to be really important. What we'll also see in the next 10 years now is a slower decline of kidney disease as we see these more disease-modifying treatments such as ours coming to the market. The really exciting area is also, as we just discussed, we have the potential now to potentially halt or potentially cure disease. I mentioned earlier about my father. I was going to a conference in New York about 9 months ago, and I just remembered that I first went to New York in the 1980s with my dad on a medical conference. He kind of like tagged a family holiday onto the back of it. And I've managed to find the brochure from that conference of the 1980s. It was a generation ago. And when they were talking about prevention of kidney disease, it wasn't about early detection of patients, treating them earlier, disease modification. It was very much things like really rudimentary dietary advice and, exercise advice. So it's amazing that I think in one generation we've come so far. I think in the next 10 years, it'll really come to fruition.
An exciting progression indeed. Thank you very much for your time today, Haseeb. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Nicole.
And that concludes another episode of the pharmaphorum podcast. You can find more information about this episode, including a download link and information about previous installments at pharmaphorum.com/podcasts. The pharmaphorum podcast is also available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Overcast, Pocket Casts, Podbean, and pretty much wherever else you download your other podcasts from. Just search for pharmaphorum and follow and hit subscribe. Of course, don't forget to visit our website itself, where you can sign up for daily and weekly news and analysis bulletins. And do follow us on Blue Sky and LinkedIn at pharmaphorum. That's all for now. Thank you for listening.